Hello everyone, welcome to the Inspire Life podcast. My name is Michael, I am one of your co-hosts, I'm also your producer, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that has been gaining a lot of popularity recently called time-restricted eating, or more popularly known as intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is something that I personally have a lot of experience with practicing and with helping other people accomplish. It is something that has been around for quite some time. A lot of people will group it into the fad diet category per se, and it's actually, it's not a fad diet. It's more of a lifestyle and a way of living and a way of being in control of food and not allowing it to dictate your life. So for today's episode, I'm going to talk a bit about my story with intermittent fasting, with longer fasting even. We're going to talk about what fasting is. I'm also going to talk about the benefits of intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you, the listener, my friends, can get started with time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting if that's something that you wish to pursue. So, without further ado, I'm going to start with my story. And if you've listened to the Inspire Life podcast, specifically if you've heard my story, the first time I ever actually had any experience with attempting fasting or doing any sort of fasting was when I was an undergrad in college. So I was 19 at the time. I was very overweight. I was well into the 300s. And a couple friends in the dorms of mine, we decided, they were supportive. They wanted to help me lose weight. They knew that was a goal of mine. That was something that I wanted to do. So one of my buddies talked to his brother, who was a trainer at the time in Los Angeles, and he had mentioned, this is in 2011, I believe, spring of 2011. He said, fasting is this thing that's been, people are doing it out here. It's been really effective for some people. Maybe your buddy should try that. He was telling his brother, who was my friend, this. So when I started intermittent fasting, actually, it was really interesting. It wasn't intermittent fasting to start for me. I just fasted. I literally was like, you know what? Food is energy. I have excess energy. So if I just use energy and don't take any in, then I'll probably lose weight. So I didn't eat for 17 days. I fasted, abstained from food completely for 17 days. One of those weekends, actually the first weekend, so I can't remember, I think I started on like a Tuesday or Wednesday or something. And that weekend, I actually drank a 40, so malt beverage. Got really drunk, decided not to do that while I was fasting. And I went 17 days without eating any food at all. That was something that honestly, physically I probably lost like 50 pounds, honestly, maybe a little less, give or take 10 pounds. But mentally, it was a really fascinating experience. I learned a lot about myself. Like, I remember one time I was over this fast. I came home the one weekend and I went to Chipotle with two of my really good friends from high school. And I told them what I was doing. And that was probably day 10 or 11. And with doing that longer fast, after day 3, I actually didn't feel hunger. I just would observe. So I went to Chipotle and I just smelled it and didn't eat anything, which was really interesting. And in fact, the only reason that I ate again to break my 17-day fast, to break fast, which we'll talk about later, breakfast and break fast, my grandparents had picked me up in St. Cloud and we stopped at Emma Crumby's, the restaurant, on the way home. So that was the longest time I'd ever fasted. I will say, as a means of trying to change my life and lose weight in a sustainable way, it wasn't effective. I lost weight, but I put that back on plus more because I didn't understand how to properly do the fast or how to break the fast, which again, we'll talk about later. Anyway, that was my first ever experience with doing any sort of fasting. So then, fast forward to 2016 while I was in grad school in Winona, I saw the concept on the internet again and I was interested by it. So I actually started because I used to always do breakfast every day and I would always eat a late lunch, late dinner. I've always been a later in the day eater. So I just started doing something that, intuitively I kind of felt inspired to do, which was just to skip breakfast. or breakfast, right? Skip the morning meal. Because I didn't ever really feel like I needed it. I felt like I had enough energy to get through at least the first part of the day without it. And when I started doing that, I noticed my biggest thing with starting intermittent fasting was my clarity and ease in the mornings. I was able to just get up, do my morning routine, brush my teeth, take a shower, whatever it is, make some coffee, and head to my office. And it was like I didn't have to devote an hour, give or take, to making food, to eating the food, to doing all this. In fact, what I would do is I was meal prep, and then I just bring lunch, and then I love cooking, if you know me, and then dinner I would just make it myself. So I would just kind of adopted this 2 meals a day, snack on fruit in between, and that was something that was really effective for me. And that was also a time when I had lost a lot of weight, but I was still fluctuating in this kind of like 240, 250 pounds, still a little more heavier than I'd like to be. And when I started doing that, I lost another like 20 pounds. So that was really powerful for that. Going further off of that, we'll get to the benefits, but let's talk more specifically at this time. What is time delayed eating? What is intermittent fasting? So not the first time, but I was reading a book. It's called Body Thrive. I think it's Kate Stillman is the author. I'm pretty sure Kate Stillman, Body Thrive. And that book is all about Ayurveda, which is the lifestyle associated with true yoga, right? Union of the divine. So part of that book, she talked about circadian rhythms and humans eating in accordance with that circadian rhythm. And in that book, I'll never forget this, she talks about how humans, our first meal should be somewhere around 11 a.m. and dinner should be somewhere around 5 or 6 p.m. So this is, Ayurveda is ancient knowledge, ancient wisdom, stuff from thousands of years ago, the way that people were living, and it's, resurfaced, and there's, I'm not an Ayurveda expert. I've read one book on it, but that intermittent fasting, if you think about it, from 5 p.m. to 11 a.m., that's an 18-hour fast every single day, right? Again, also, I'm not a religious expert, but I know in Islamic culture and religion, Ramadan is a time when people will fast during the daylight hours, right? So there are other areas of human society and cultures that have adopted fasting long before this idea of intermittent fasting showed up in the last decade or so. What fasting is, like I said, is just restricting and not eating food, not taking in calories, which is really important, right? So drinking hot chocolate or a latte, that's not fasting. Because if you're intaking, or like doing protein shakes, right? Or milk even. When you're intaking calories, you are stopping the fasting effect because your body has to process that energy. This is what it's all about, is your body literally using the energy that you already have inside of you to do something really powerful called autophagy. So before we get into that, let's talk about different types of fasting. So I personally do a 16-8, right? So I fast for about 16 hours every day, give or take an hour or two. Sometimes if I feel a little hungrier, I'll have, usually a piece of fruit is what I break my fast with, and we'll talk about the importance of what you break your fast with, right? That's typically what I do, and that's what I see the best results. Some people say 12 hours is plenty. There's also people who do alternate day fasting. So one day they'll eat, the next day maybe they won't eat, or they'll have very restricted calories. There's also something called the warrior diet, which is where you do a 20-hour fast each day. There's also something called like the 5-2 split, which I've seen, which is like Monday through Friday you eat regular and then you just don't eat on weekends. There's a lot of different reasons and different ways, but it all really comes down to this idea of autophagy, which is, autophagy in simplest terms I can explain it is, that's when your body is clearing out the waste from our cells. It's when your body is taking the time to regenerate new healthy cells and repair itself, right? If you think about it, when we're intaking food and we're constantly spiking insulin, our body is constantly working on those those hormones and the things that we're releasing into our body, and it's not taking the time to actually pause, reset, rest, digest, be in that parasympathetic state and rebuild itself. So that's one of the biggest things when it comes to fasting. If you've read any of the research that's coming out about intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating, it's phenomenal, right? I mean, I just made a list. Some of the things that they're finding, people with high blood pressure, it's lowering that LDL, so that lower density cholesterol, I think that's LDL. It's helping people lower their blood pressure. Weight loss is a big one. There was actually a study done, I can't remember who did it, but they had mice that were eating sugary and fatty foods, right? They had one group of mice was eating all day. They had, they could eat as much as they want when they wanted. The other mice, they only let them eat between like an 8-hour period. And the mice that were eating all day were actually gaining weight and becoming obese mice. The other mice, who were just delaying the time, not restricting what they were eating, but the timing of their eating, were remaining the same size, which is fascinating. Same amount of calories for all mice involved. Another big one, and this is kind of where looking at this as a lifestyle versus a fad diet, is this concept of ketosis, right? Ketosis is when your body is burning body fat and you're running on the ketones that come down from breaking down that body fat as your primary source of energy. So the keto diet, which is South Beach and Atkins rebranded, is all about eating low carbohydrates and high fats and protein to keep you in this state of ketosis. The quickest way to get into ketosis is not to do a keto diet, it is to fast. It is to not eat, because your body will eventually get to the point where it burns through all the carbohydrates you have, the insulin has spiked and your body has used it all. Now your body is going to start doing that deeper burn, that deeper cleaning out of those cells. And honestly, I mean, when it comes to the keto diet versus fasting, it's really nice. One of the biggest and the best things that I could tell people about fasting and why I'm such an advocate is because mentally, it is way more feasible to restrict time than it is to restrict foods, right? I mean, we live in a culture, there's sugar everywhere. I like cookies. I ate cookies last night. And you know what? I know that it's not the greatest for me. It's not something I do every day. But because I practice fasting, I know that my body is going to cycle through and get rid of the effects of those cookies before I eat something today. Okay? Looking at food and keeping food as whole food is really important. And when you include fasting in with that mindset, you can have some serious results. And these are results that can happen relatively quickly, and they're going to be sustainable as long as you can stick with fasting. So again, like I mentioned too, a big part of it is regulating insulin. And when we think about the epidemic that is obesity, the epidemic that is diabetes and heart disease in our culture, it's fascinating to me that the idea of intermittent fasting, they're just starting to do more research on it, that it's not being prescribed. Like, people with insulin resistance, this is a way that we can reverse that, because you're allowing your body to actually utilize the insulin that it's created before having another spike, okay? And speaking of insulin spikes, we're going to talk a little bit about how to get started with fasting and how to set yourself up for success when it comes to intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. So the biggest and the first step, if you've never done it, just start tracking. You don't even have to track what you eat. Track the times of day that you eat, including snacking, right? We know that as you continue to eat throughout the day, you're constantly spiking insulin. So if you can just start with knowing when you eat and then be strategic about, okay, where can I maybe push a meal back, right? Like maybe I can push breakfast back to later in the day. Maybe I can eat my dinner earlier. Excuse me. If you start by knowing when you eat, know what your habits are around food, and what your energy levels are too at those certain times of day, it's a great place to start, because again, I'm all about tracking things, keeping track of what's working well, what can be upgraded. And if you don't know your starting point, how do you know if you've made progress? So the next thing, which is a big one, is start small, okay? I'm not telling you to go fast for 17 days. That's probably a pretty dumb idea. I don't know who you are listening, but don't go fast for 17 days right off the bat. Start with something little. Like if you're accustomed to eating a dinner around 7 or 7:30, maybe like a little treat like 8:30, and then you're having breakfast right away in the morning at like 7, start with a 12-hour fast. Start by going from 8 to 8. Then maybe you eat dinner at 8 p.m., see if you can get to noon the next day. And again, track what happens. Track your energy levels, track your cravings, how you feel. It's all about being mindful of, if we're going to try a new strategy such as time restricted eating, how is it impacting us, right? That's a really big one. The next one, and this is a big one, and I've mentioned this a couple times, is breaking your fast, or what our culture calls breakfast. Okay, think about it. Breakfast, break fast. You're breaking the fast from the overnight. Our culture has kind of made us believe that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, which it is. However, our culture has also made us believe that breakfast is something that's supposed to be consumed between 6 and 8 a.m., which simply is not true, okay? I typically break my fast daily at about 2 p.m. And then I usually have dinner around, because I work kind of late, I'm usually have dinner around 8:30 or 9. And that's just how I get my 16-hour fast in daily. I do have a little coffee in the morning. I will sometimes have like lime juice with salt, which is a great alkalizing effect for the body. But for the most part, I'm not doing any calories until 2 p.m. My breakfast, too, I'm very, very mindful of what I break my fast with for several reasons. One, if I break myself with something that is refined sugar, something that is heavy in carbs is going to spike my insulin, that's going to set me up for disaster later on in the day. When that comes back down and I have the crash, I'm going to be craving more sweets and more sugar. So, in my research on food and what the best breakfast or break fast is, I choose fruit, which has sugar, but it also has a lot of fiber. And specifically, I want to pick a fruit that is high in the specific kind of fiber called pectin, Pectin. So pectin is, long story short, is this fiber that is that our bodies don't fully break down until it gets all the way down towards our colon, right? So what that's doing is it's bringing more nutrients, which is keeping us satiated all the way through our digestive tract, and really high in prebiotics, right? So if you're into the probiotics, you need to have prebiotics for them to bind to. It's really going to help with gut health. And overall, starting the day with something fibrous and delicious, like apples and bananas are two of the foods that are highest in pectin. So that's just how I typically break my fast. I'm not perfect, sometimes it is a cookie or something like that. But the fact that I am able to continue to focus on fasting each day helps me see success. And that being said too, fasting is great. And if you're gonna eat fast food, like McDonald's, greasy stuff for every single meal, you're still only gonna get so far, right? We still gotta focus on eating whole, real, nutritious foods, because that's what's gonna serve us best. If you're going to choose between whole nutritious foods each day, or if you're going to do intermittent fasting and just eat junk food, do the whole nutritious foods, especially if you're accustomed to eating, the typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner that our culture has kind of created. So, long story short, I just want to kind of get my thoughts on fasting. I've practiced intermittent fasting for about 3 years, and I've seen tremendous results, especially too with doing resets, after the holidays, that we just had. It can be a really powerful tool for many, many things in your life. Not to mention the mental clarity that comes around just not having to worry about preparing an extra meal a day. I'm actually at the point where a lot of times I'll just kind of have an apple and then some nuts and snack, and then just eat one bigger meal at night. And I kind of enjoy that. That's my style. So if you've listened with me this far, I thank you. I'm, as always, very curious about feedback. What is your experience with intermittent fasting? Also, if you're listening, I do have a really great PDF document that details more of the science behind intermittent fasting and how these different methods of fasting that I've mentioned, the warrior diet, 16-8, 12-12, the 5-2, how these different types of fasting work and some strategies to be successful with it. If you want that PDF though, you need to email me. You can email me at michael@coachkrug.com. It's that simple. I'm not going to post this anywhere. This is only an article I want to send to our devoted listeners, or if you've listened this far in this episode. So again, to wrap up, intermittent fasting is not a fad diet. It's a lifestyle. It's powerful. It's something that you're going to see become more and more popular as we progress. And I'm really excited about it because, obesity Diabetes, heart disease, like I mentioned, these epidemics are things that are continually getting worse, and they have but we've refound, what it means to truly consume energy as a human, and I think it's gonna have really great effects for a lot of people. So I'm really excited about it. I hope you are too. Again, thank you for listening, and until next time, keep inspiring.